This is a very personal view of the Flying Doctor service. I'm not going to go into the history about how the stockman died at Halls Creek and all of the rest of the tripe that you've heard. The Flying Doctor service has grown into a large, burgeoning bureaucracy that's, of course, out of everybody's finance. When I remember such things as my mother standing on street corners in Perth gathering money in a tin, and it's come a long, long way since then. My initial interest in the Flying Doctor service, I suppose, was generated by my brother, who was then flying for the Flying Doctor service. And a lot of you here will remember Maylands, where we all started flying training. I imagine a lot of us there. My brother was actually based in Meekatharra, and he was flying the Foxmoth. And that is the very aeroplane, you probably know that aeroplane, living down at Serpentine these days. And little by little, the Foxmoth was being replaced by the Cessna 180s, which were a far, far superior aeroplane, of course. The Flying Doctor service then was a disparate group of three sections in WA. There was WA section, which looked after Carnarvon, Meekatharra and Port Hedland. There was the Eastern Goldfields, who looked after Kalgoorlie, and they had yet to get their first aircraft, which they did subsequently, a Cessna 182 Foxtrot Delta Kilo for Kalgoorlie. And of course there was the Victorian section, who had a de Havilland Dove up in Kimberley's, and that had been previously crewed by MMA pilots. That was also, the Kimberley's was the scene of that dreadful Avro accident. Avro Anson speared in at Hawkstone Point doing a medevac from Tableland Station. So that changed, it sparked the biggest aerial search for an aeroplane in Australian history, and it gave the whole concept a bit of a change. Then we were lucky and the Cessna 180s began to replace the Fox. That's Foxtrot Delta Mike, and that's parked outside our hangar at Meekatharra. The 180 was a mighty fine aeroplane. They were a wonderful addition after the Foxmoth. For instance, the Fox couldn't make it direct from Meekatharra to Perth, and we'd have to land at either Mount Magnet or Ballajoo to get fuel. The 180 had a heater. You could actually carry a stretcher patient in it, which we did regularly, and it was heated and comfortable and could do Meekatharra Perth non-stop. They were a great little aeroplane, a marvellous addition to the Flying Doctor service, but we've got a little way to go yet. And about this time I completed my Lamey training with MMA, a very, very fine company I thought, and they gave us a 5-year apprenticeship. I came out of that ready to start my Lamey licences and the commercial licence. Then at the completion of my apprenticeship, I went on under the RFDS, and at that stage we had still 3 Cessna 180s. The 180s were being retired from service in lieu of the Beechcraft Baron. That's Foxtrot Delta November. That incidentally was the fastest Baron we ever had. It was a 190 knot aeroplane for some reason or other. They must have put the wing on upside down or something, or a Wednesday aeroplane. It was a very fine machine, but once again we're transitioning here. The Baron, whilst being a very good, reliable aeroplane, pleasant to fly, eminently reliable, but still restricted from a patient carrying point of view. Another view of a Baron in our livery, and you can see that down the back, which made it infinitely easier to load, was a baggage locker door, which was wide enough to fit the stretcher through, and it was a 180 knot aeroplane, which was a far cry, of course, from the 180s. And so the last of the Cessna 180s, which was in service, was Foxtrot Delta Hotel for Hedland. It eventually became down here as the Barons took over, and we started to get more twin-engine aeroplanes. That's Foxtrot Delta Hotel, showing you how we accessed the stretcher. We'd slide the stretcher over the top of the strut and round the corner. It's been described since as being somewhat primitive, but I tell you what, there are a lot of people who didn't think it was too primitive. A bloke I picked up from a Rarey homestead one day had fallen down a well, fractured his shoulder, and it was a 50-minute flight into Meekatharra as against at least 2.5 hours corrugated gravel road, and he thought it was pretty good. So the 180 really performed wonderful service. as I said there, FDH was the last of the 180s in service and figured very largely in my subsequent life. I saw fit in later life, and you possibly saw it at, when we found aeroplane had been rotting in a farmer's hay shed for 12 and a half years down the Margaret River, and Penny and I bought it, and we spent 2.5 years of our life and 2 mortgages on our home restoring it, and that's the condition in which it was delivered. That's the colours and everything that we received it in March 60 to join the Flying Doctor Service. It had gone through a whole series of incidents to get to that stage. Similarly, along the way, I'd had a bit to do with Robin Miller. That there she is next door to one of our first Beechcraft Dukes. The Duke was the first venture for WA section into pressurisation. A singularly unsatisfactory aeroplane, plagued with all sorts of problems, not to mention the length of runway it used was legendary. But for all of that, we're little by little, we're moving along. And then, of course, we had very few facilities, really, as they have now, and that is a typical transfer on the tarmac at Jandakot. We had no transfer station, nothing. We had one small hangar, and we had some very fine engineers. A bloke called Rodney Foxtrot Lawrence was a wonderful chief engineer we had. Rodney was with us. One Bevan Marshall, whom you'll find is here in the room today, came to us, and all in all, we were a very close-knit, it was a very personalised situation. As I said earlier, nothing like the sprawling empire that it is today. So there's been a bit of a change. You can see the difference in the technology here. The Foxglove didn't do any near the task that the Hawker 900 did, and the Fox, it's good to see that it did survive. And then I left the Flying Doctor Service and got into cahoots with a gentleman called Alex Simpson, who had the then Cessna dealership here. I went off to Port Hedland for a couple of years and started a little company on his behalf called Transwest Air Charter. I went up there with one Cessna 337 push-pull, did a lot of door knocking and talking, and subsequently won a bit of a contract with a little outfit nobody had ever heard of and would probably never hear of again. It was called Mount Newman Mining Company. And we won a milk run contract for the construction of the railway line. We were there for the first peg in the railway line, and we did a formation fly past for the first iron ore that went out. And we had by that time 12 aircraft based in Port Hedland. I was doing all the pilot training, the maintenance and all the rest of it with the RAMI licences. I was the only person around. So I had gone on a lot of work in the Kimberley at that time, and I was approached by Civil Flying Services to take over the operation of the Victorian section of the Flying Doctor Service in the Kimberleys. How so, you'd say? Back in '35, the West Australian government had no way of funding the Kimberley. They couldn't manage it, and the Victorians adopted it. And my head office was heaven on a stick as far as I was concerned, because I was in Derby and they were in Melbourne, and that was just the best place you can have your administration, is the other side of the country. And I accepted their offer, finished my Queen Air rating, and took up my assignment in Derby on Christmas Eve '69. This is my patch. From Bandora, halfway down to Port Hedland, right up to where the border met the coast up at Columborough, that was my playground. And boy did we play. We did a lot of flying. Back in those days we did a lot of clinic flights, and the history of the Kimberley nailed itself to me. Bear in mind that there were no bitumen roads, no telephones, no TV, very indifferent radio communications. We were totally isolated during the wet except by air. The legends were still there, the mass shooting at Mitchell Harbour Crossing, the spiked stew at Lissadell Station. I met some of the people who pulled the triggers at Mitchell Harbour Crossing. They were still in the Kimberleys. I don't know why it never came to public knowledge, but it all happened. And there was so much history that happened out in the Kimberleys. And then I fell in love. My Beechcraft Queen Air. What a fabulous aeroplane. I couldn't believe it. that they allowed me to be responsible for this. By this time I had laney licences on the aeroplane, and once again my main administration was in Melbourne. We were up there in the Kimberleys with the base director and his wife, Jim and Norma Kesey, who were fabulous people and were like a second family. It was a very personal operation. You gave and got a lot back. Because we did so many clinic circuits, we got to know pretty well everybody in the Kimberleys. And if there was never going to be a question, if you had a request to go flying, there was never ever going to be a good excuse for not going. The Queen was wonderful to maintain. Didn't have a lot of facilities, and once again, of course, there was no infrastructure at places like Kalgoorlie, Meekatharra, Port Hedland and Derby. There were no engineers, no engineering facilities. By this time I'd done my laney licences. The Queen was good to work on. Big cows, you could get inside. I did all the line maintenance like changing magnetos, spark plugs, all that sort of thing. Heavy maintenance, 100-hour inspections were done here in Perth, which was a bit of a downer because effectively you lost 12% of your 100 hourly by ferrying backwards and forwards to Perth. But the IGSO 480 engines were critical. They need a lot of careful attention. As a pilot I loved them because you could understand they were allowed to pull 44 inches of manifold pressure on takeoff. I don't think I ever pulled any more than 42. In the 6 odd years I flew it, I never had a premature, and I adored it. Life couldn't possibly get better. Had, as I said, a number of clinic circuits. We were concentrating much more on general health and preventative medicine. Then that all disappeared by the by subsequently. But we had a lot of clinics, and one of the clinic flights involved departing Derby at about 4 o'clock on a Thursday morning. I'd repositioned by myself, pitch black of course, and go out to the airport, climb into the Queen Air, calling Port Hedland on 6610 HF radio, taxiing Derby for Wyndham, get up to Wyndham and be ready to turn around by about 6 o'clock in the morning. When I say it couldn't get better, it just did. The flight nurse came on board. We got along very well, and we flew together a lot. She had subsequently, or previous to me meeting her, she had flown with Robin Miller when they were doing the Sabin clinics, and so she enjoyed aeroplanes, and she'd been offered the job as flight nurse in Wyndham by the then embryonic Community Health Services, and so she thought, well, that sounded pretty good. I saw her in the visits to Wyndham and so on a total of 21 times, and a convenient 100 hourly came up, so we took advantage of that, and I brought the Queen Air down. We were married on a Saturday morning, and then crewed the aeroplane back. As I said, communication was a lot less reliable then, and being as how we were by then this time living together, it was very convenient when we got an alarm. But alarms, of course, once again, we didn't have any telephones, and there was nothing like the technology, and this is how it worked. Thunderstorms and all, eventually that would be picked up in the Derby RFDS base. We could hear the bell ringing down in the base. We'd go open up, VJB Derby, and game's on. So Penny would go to the hospital, and I would go and get the aircraft ready, and we'd hit the road. And we did, as I said, a lot of flying, and once again we were very much on our own. Department of Civil Aviation reckoned they were regulating the industry, but Penny and I left Derby at 6 o'clock one morning to do a clinic in Fitzroy Crossing, went on to Halls Creek, back to Fitzroy Crossing to pick up a patient, back to Derby, advised the patient had to go to Perth, so we cleaned up and hit the road again, passed through Meekatharra just after midnight, into Perth. We'd been on duty for 21 hours. But that's what you did, because nobody else was going to do it. And in any event, you could always declare a mercy flight. And I could probably be criticised for what we did, but for heaven's sake, when all of these people in the outback were personal friends, you couldn't say, no, I'm not going to go. So we did that, and another rather unfortunate incident I suffered. I was en route from Tableland to Lansdowne, and I was levelled off at probably 4,500, 5,000 feet, and the store warning blew. I thought, oh, that's odd. I pressed that and it quieted it. And then, for no particular reason, I gazed out the left window and saw the whole top of the wing just go black and buckling. An uncontrolled fire, evidently the fuel tank had ruptured. The store warning wire went through there, as did the navigation lights, and it hucked up. The first thing it did was burn the rear spar in half and burnt a flat drive, so I got an asymmetric flat condition. So I thought, well, it'd be a good idea to get the undercarriage down out of this in case that's on fire, and there's a 4-gallon tank of oil right above it. So I got the gear down and shut down the left engine. By this time I was beginning to think nobody loved me anymore. And anyway, there was not a hell of a lot of options, but I managed to put the aeroplane, which incidentally, hats off to Beechcraft again, it flew beautifully. It was just wonderful, with full asymmetric flap, gear down, one engine shut down, and it handled the whole job beautifully. I landed at a place called Lansdowne, evacuated the aircraft and put the fire out with a handheld fire bottle, and it, just for being the only lamey around the place, I had to get help from Perth, some further help, and we flew a wing up, and I had to go out to Lansdowne and change the wing under fairly uncomfortable circumstances, but I guess that serves you right for burning the bloody thing off in the first place. About this time, Penny stopped flying, and we won a wonderful nurse from Victorian Air Ambulance. We stole her, and she continued flying, which brings me to the point that, geez, you've got to doff your lid to the flight nurses. When we had appalling weather to fly in, you know, be punching out 300 miles across the desert to Balgo Hills in the middle of the wet, the thunderstorm season, I developed a bit of a technique of taking off, levelling off at say 3,000. The base of the thunderstorm was usually about 5, and just sit there and wait for the bolt of lightning, and it impinged itself on the back of your retina, and you could see the column of rain. So divert a little bit around that and wait for the next bolt of lightning, and work your way 300 miles out across the desert like that. No radar, no nav aids, no nothing. But somehow we managed it, and once again I could have been criticised. Maybe you shouldn't have put the aeroplane in danger, maybe you shouldn't have gone. But when it was somebody you knew personally with their child in danger, there was no way in the world you were going to say no, so we never once didn't go. And that more or less was the tune for the 6-7 years I spent for the Flying Doctor Service, but it was a very, very personal thing. It was a far, far different cry from that great empire that you see down the road now, and the technology they've got now. I'm not sure that they do the job any better. But that more or less wrapped us up. We found FDH, as I said, rotting in a farmer's hay shed. We restored that and did considerable amount of fundraising for the Flying Doctor Service, the Cancer Kids, Angel Flight and the like. The aeroplane was unfortunately subsequently destroyed. We went, but just before it was, we did another job, and that's a publicity job we did for the Flying Doctor Service. They rang me up one day and said, is there any chance you could bring the 180 down and park it next to our latest edition? And I said, yeah, well, how about let's do it in the air, and we'll bring the Fox Moth as well. So that's Werner Bullman flying the Fox, me and the 180, and the test pilot from Adelaide flying the Flying Doctor aeroplane. And that picture turned up in the Flying Doctor Service. It's about 4 feet long and 3 feet deep, and I still haven't figured out a decent way of stealing it yet, but I'm working on it, because I think it'd look better on my wall than it does on theirs. But the whole experience that I had was just a life apart. The bureaucracy, the nonsense from CASA and so on have taken over the ability to live out on your own, make your own decisions, do things shooting from the hip, which we did. And I reckon, all in all, we did a pretty bloody good job. Thank you.